Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thanks again so much for joining me here. Hope you're having a great day. My goal is to make your day a whole heck of a lot better by giving you some insight here on Bitcoin and specific altcoins as well. So what we want to do is cover here this falling wedge breakout pattern. A lot of folks are talking about that on social media. Truth is, this is a bearish trend on the macro. So these little breakouts are going to happen. A lot of them do end up fizzling out. So we're just going to talk about that. We're also going to discuss our general weekend price action too. We've seen 4 red weekends leading to this weekend here. I think we're probably going to see something similar. Basically right now, market makers are allowing late longs to jump on in, where we have true retail longs at 31%, above our 16% variable there for liquidation delta for open interest. Now we'll talk more about how those things all kind of factor in together, but for the most part, this back-end data is super important to recognize when taking some trades this weekend. So I'm leaning more towards the price pulling back this weekend just based on previous trends and general weakness right now. We're seeing ETF net outflows as well, which is never a favorable sign. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into it. Quick heads up, traders, we got a $12,000 deposit reward bonus between now and March 10th. Use my link to register if you've registered in the past, automatically eligible. Links down below for more information. All right, folks, before we jump into the back-end data, just a quick reminder, hit the like button, maybe even comment below, show your support here. If we get over 200 likes in this video, I'll make another one tomorrow. That is always my promise for you. We got really close yesterday, so it goes to show I'll probably still do that just because I love this and I really appreciate my community. So there's a great chance that I'm going to be pretty consistent, which I have been in the past. But why don't we look at consistency here with order blocks first and just kind of see 70,500 is kind of a big sell order there, at least bigger than others. Obviously, there's a delta here, a little bit more selling than buying pressure, or in other words, interest in selling at the local resistance, which is close to that 70K range, plus or minus. So we're in a resistance range right now, folks. Generally not best practice to try to take a long into it, even though we have good momentum today. And that momentum is based on fundamentals. We had good CPI data release this morning and the price pumped since then. But historically, which we'll look at here soon, weekends have been pretty lackluster for Bitcoin and obviously altcoins as well. Now, taking a look here really quick though, just to understand, Bitcoin's up 5% on the day. Most sectors are upwards of about 5 to 6% depending on, right? Some of them, AI for example, 8.7%. This one's doing pretty well. So overall, there are some good little things happening here. I think altcoins are due to push a little harder than Bitcoin just based on that disparity between altcoin dominance and Bitcoin dominance, but we'll look at that here in just a minute. Quickly, just a note here, for liquidation on the short-term time frame, there's not much left to the upside, a lot more to the downside. So as low as 65K, still that potential reality for us. And if we zoom out a little bit, for the last week's worth of trading, there are some 7-day liquidation ranges still due to get hit, upwards of 71.5. So keep in mind, if you're considering a long, this is good incentive, but the odds of this happening over a weekend is pretty poor, at least pretty low. So I think that the 7-day liquidation is going to wait till next week. That's just kind of my thoughts there. When you look at the 30-day, it's kind of all over the place. So there's no distinct definitive areas here. I do think that the lower liquidation range, about 64,000, does still make sense if we are to reject out at 70K for that next leg down. Once more, that's kind of just the general consensus there on the macro. To clarify, altcoin season index, just so you understand, is slowly increasing. It's not very much though, right? You see most altcoins are doing pretty poor versus Bitcoin, but we're up to that almost $1 trillion market cap, which is good for altcoins, but it's not great. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be rocking and rolling. It just shows that some money's flowing into altcoins, right? So when we take a look at this here, we can see the last 24 hours, a pretty solid amount of altcoin dominance increasing with stablecoin dominance pulling back. That's pretty standard. You're going to see money flowing away from altcoins, flowing into altcoins. Money flowing away from stable and into altcoins. And honestly, money's just flowing into every single market right now. Okay. And that's just kind of with the quote unquote tentative bottom in. That's what's going to happen. Keep in mind, this is a short-term bullish trend on a macro bearish structure. So I need to kind of drive that home because some folks seem to get tunnel vision. They put those blinders on like horses and they just tend to run forward right for the gates. I see some people on social media saying they're taking longs to 80,000 right now. While I love the idea, there's a ton of resistance between now and then, all right? Good news is CME gap at 84,000, but there's still a CME gap from 15,000 from a few years ago, right? There's no guarantees those CME gaps get filled right away. What you need to focus on more so is the local ranges. So let's why don't we go ahead and talk about that because we want to understand the invalidation and validation levels, right? So when we look at the macro structure here, this is a 1 month's worth of liquidation on the right-hand side. Let's go ahead and pull this up a little bit more. There's definitely a lot of liquidation on the upside. Okay, there's no doubt about it. good chance that some of those longs could get hit, right? I think it's a pretty low probability because we have a local resistance in the 74K range, which we'll look at here on the chart soon, specifically that 72,000 for our local initial high. But the bottom line here is that with this big, large amount of liquidation further away, it's less relevant for the moment, okay? What is relevant, of course, is understanding that 69 to 70,000, distinct probability we're going to hit that level. In fact, I just got to refresh this. This is a 3-day time frame, by the way. We can see somewhere between, 69.5 rather, and 70,000.3. So if you're not familiar, 70,300 is that point of control here locally, and 69.5 is just that local little shelf there that we kind of rejected out tentatively. We've got some resistance ranges coming up here between now and 71.5. All that being said, 4-hour time frame, just kind of give you some perspective here. Falling wedge breakout, resistance range above the price between 70.3 and 71.5. Down below, of course, these are a little bit further out, but we're looking at 63,000 as a close approximate for support range, upwards of somewhere in the range of about 65K. There's a liquidation chunk down below. We could also say the same thing about above, right? Liquidation chunk right here in that resistance range. So general consensus here is that we're kind of in the middle of a range. Maybe be careful trying to force a trade here. All right. Because once more, and actually let's look at this here first so you can understand how the weekends have been trading. It's important to recognize this. So this is kind of the 4-hour time frame, just based on the last handful of weekends, right? So ever since roughly 100,000, or just say halfway through the beginning of the year, January 15th, 1 month ago, we saw a pretty significant correction here for the first Sunday. That was about a 4% pullback. We look here the following weekend. After a pump on Friday, we saw a 4% pullback. After a pump on Friday, which again, these pumps I'm referring to are pretty small, but they're very similar to what we're seeing right now. We're looking at a 11% pullback. You all probably remembered that weekend. And then this past weekend, after we pumped throughout the Thursday morning through Friday afternoon, we saw a 6.5% correction. So that whole average there puts us about 5% average correction on Saturday and Sunday combined. So once more, these trends don't always continue, but they continue until they don't. So until we get some pretty definitive breaks above key level resistances, i.e. this descending type of trend, there's pretty much no reason I want to consider a trade to the upside with gusto, right? We don't want to take a trade to the, to 80,000, 90,000, or 100,000 just yet because we haven't broken those key level resistances, okay? All right, so that's good little insight for you. If we look at the charts here, just go into the daily time frame, kind of want to recognize the macro structure here. We're still under the 20-day SMA. This is kind of that descending trend line that's most important, not a small falling wedge breakout on a lower time frame. The macro structures here are still bearish. So I think over the next coming days, just say blah, 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 we keep within about a week or two, we're trending in the 72,000 or higher range. That would be a better call for a long position to 80,000 or 78,000, which in case you didn't know, 78,000 is kind of our resistance range for us based on previous week lows. So I'm thinking we're going to see some slowing pressure between 78 and this guy right here, 87. Okay, those are previous lows. Generally speaking, those are areas in which you want to pay attention to. So we'll just go ahead and mark that on the chart for later, just to kind of give us some perspective on, roughly what we're looking at there. So those are kind of my thoughts here. I'd love to hear yours, though. Please comment below. Let me know. Helps grow the channel and the algorithm. Views are abysmally low lately, so obviously watching the videos all the way through and hitting that like button and commenting on what you think you may or may not see here moving forward will be definitively helpful. All right, folks, quick look here at Ethereum, double checking some important stuff. I do want to kind of recognize and just kind of reiterate a few things here. We're seeing a pretty massive overextension leading into a key level resistance here, that point of control. And there's also an identified range here of open interest between 2060 and 2100. So there's definitely some resistance above the price right now. I think we're likely to see a short-term correction, mainly based on majority liquidation having been swept. So just be mindful of that. We do side by side here with Ethereum versus Bitcoin. They're both looking semi-similar. However, Bitcoin did establish a lower low and Ethereum established a parallel low. Oftentimes that can be a sign of reversal. Hindsight's 2020. I was sleeping at that point, but usually what I look for is that lower low pattern being discontinued on the specific altcoin you're trading, and we can see Ethereum was doing a bit better before the last leg up. So just some kind of things to kind of pay attention to. When we take a look at the daily time frame, the quick summarization here is that it's pretty straightforward. We're still in a bearish scenario, so don't try to get ahead of yourself here and think that we're back on track just because we have a short-term correction. But once more, bearish trends have a tendency of continuing until they don't. And at this point, it's pretty obvious that we're in a descending trend. Okay, so you probably noticed the market's doing poorly. While I do think Ethereum is probably one of the few coins that'll probably do better than most coins here on this little run, we can see most altcoins are up about 5 to 6% versus Bitcoin up about 4%. So that tells us we're at like a 1.25% increase, which isn't super significant, but it is something nonetheless. Having said that, here, a 4-hour time frame, just kind of zoom in here. Once more, I'll clean up the charts. I'll post that on social media here shortly. But for the most part, I do want you to recognize a couple of things here. There's a fair value gap that was just created as low as 1970. A lot of folks will have success shorting those fair value gaps once the overextension occurs. We are overextended already in the hourly time frame, but 4-hour has broken moderately bullish. So short term, it might be best to presume we're going to go a bit higher to this $2,000 range, or probably 2080 for that point of control. And if we break that level, 2130 would be the worst case scenario for that local high. A lot of times you will see somewhat of a cup and handle pattern potential breakout there, or just more importantly, rejection for the second attempt of that previous local high. So those are just kind of things and areas I'm going to be looking for. I'm leaning more towards this weekend being kind of bearish, just based on previous weekends this year so far have all pretty much been red. So not super trustworthy leading into a green weekend here, a green Friday leading into a weekend. I think we're probably going to see some late longs get rinsed, right? And a lot of that comes with this area here, this divergence, so to speak. We have 32% delta for true retail longs versus that of only 16%, roughly half of that amount for open interest delta. That's not a good sign here for longs. That kind of suggests that we'll probably see some kind of correction in the relative near future. Once more, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? Let me know. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Quick heads up to our traders. We got a 15% discount on trading fees if you use my link to register through Bitunix. Links down below in the description. All right, folks, quick look here at Solana. Looking pretty strong here in the short-term timeframes. I would recommend being careful, though, taking along right now at the tentative top. We got a pretty significant overextension. Now, let's just quickly look at the side-by-side here and kind of see where we're at for Solana. And just recognize that big picture, it's performing very similar to Bitcoin, only its lower lows are a bit harder or higher. In other words, even though we're 2x of Bitcoin on the day, it has a tendency of pulling back roughly the same amount. So just be mindful. We see a pullback from Bitcoin, same scenario here for Solana as a strong potential. When we look at Solana, of course, on the back end, we want to recognize $88 to $89 at local high range. It's going to be somewhat of an area of interest. What I mean by that is we're probably going to see some selling pressure there. It's very common to see local highs retested and essentially rejected the first time. So open interest is there, kind of reinforcing that area there. Now, when it comes to liquidation delta, it's increasing. We've broken even, or we're above break even, right? Basically implying more longs and shorts in the market right now for Solana, and 90 is kind of that upper area of liquidation based on the last 7 days. So we're seeing some confluence there, 88 to 90. That's kind of an area of interest that I mentioned to my community yesterday of a consideration for a short. Or I think I paraphrased with 85 to 90, but that's kind of we're entering that resistance range. So we see a little bit more of a pump from Bitcoin. I think Solana will probably start to slow down in that range. So just some friendly advice. You're considering a short, maybe wait a little bit longer so this little FOMO Friday things kind of fades away, but also maybe consider averaging in too, depending on the kind of trader you are. Now, right now at this point, less is more. I generally recommend being careful with taking trades. We do have a Bitcoin and Ethereum short open, of course, so it sounds very contradictory, but they're tighter margins, and we're making sure we're not getting too crazy with the leverage either, right? So just important to remember, risk tolerance, risk management is super important. Take a look at the 4-hour time frame just to kind of recognize we got pretty good little convergence here, essentially breaking above local support and local descending trends and the moving averages. So while it's still a little premature, a little early with that point of control at 87, once more we got a pretty solid resistance range above the price here. There's a good chance we do start to reject out here soon. So just kind of being careful here, just putting this up here just so you can kind of see that range of roughly 90 to 85. We're getting closer to that level, and there's a lot of confluence there based on resistance and open interest above the price. So that point of control also reaffirms some resistance coming up here soon. Just want to reiterate this too, in case you missed it. Some folks do have a tendency of just fast forwarding to their favorite coin, which is all well and good, but if you're skipping on Bitcoin, you're doing yourself a disservice because you really have to understand how it works. Last 4 weekends, we've seen about 5% average corrections on Saturday and Sunday when we typically have a green Friday. we're seeing a very, very similar structure right now. So just be mindful. Profits will be taken at some point. Okay. So try not to get too crazy. Try not to be one of those persons that's taking along to 80,000. While I understand the idea there, we haven't broken any macro descending trends yet, right? So don't get too crazy or ahead of yourself just because we have this lower time frame convergence for a short-term pump to the upside. All right. Anyways, I just like to talk be the voice of reason for a lot of folks because unfortunately people have a tendency getting too emotional in this industry and it's super easy, super common. I don't fault you for it. Just make sure you learn from it. All right. So those are my thoughts on Solana. Comment below. Let me know. What are you thinking? All right, folks, take a quick look here at SUI. I just want to kind of reiterate first so you understand specifically we got some resistance at 102 to the $1 mark even, right? We got that significant point of control coming up here. It's a solid chance SUI does end up pulling back soon, especially if Bitcoin starts to taper off. We got overextensions in lower time frames as well, so just be mindful that there's a decent chance that we could see a correction. However, broken descending trend line, both Bitcoin, pretty much every single coin out there has a tendency of pumping right now because their local descending trends have been broken and Bitcoin's running. It's just kind of par for the course. Just once more, we've seen some pretty solid Fridays followed by some pretty bad Saturdays and Sundays this in the last rolling 4 weekends. So I just want you to be mindful of that, okay? Please understand this feels good for the moment, but it's going to feel really bad if you FOMO into a long right now, going into a key level resistance range. Open interest does signify that we have support at 94 to 93 cents. So keep in mind, you're going to open a short. I wouldn't try to short to zero. Okay. It doesn't make a lot of sense there. We got a ton of liquidation long delta. So that does suggest a lot of strength in this coin. It could continue to pump. This coin has a tendency of running fast when other coins don't. Okay. So good news is there's more meat left on the bone for this coin, but it's just inherently more risky to consider a long leading into a resistance. Speaking of resistance, we got 110, 105, and $1 even for some areas of liquidation, which oftentimes people put their stop losses there. So that's oftentimes the reason why we see hunts to those levels. So I wouldn't be surprised if this dollar, once we hit $1, it does a quick little wick up to screw every other last late short just above the price. Okay, that happens so common. So just make sure you don't have too tight of stop losses when you trade when these liquidation hunts occur, especially on this coin. Obviously, I want you to watch close and make sure you're using good risk tolerance, but it's one of those coins that's just it has a tendency of running. So I wouldn't be surprised we're not done pushing higher and we get one lower last little pump. So I think it's too early to short and too late to long. I really don't like trading these transitions. So that's kind of where I'm at for SUI, but my interested level would be $1 to 105 as a rough estimate. Catch some of those liquidation wicks and possibly write it down to that $93, $94 or 93, 94 cent range for that lower liquidation and or that point of control. But those are my thoughts. There's no point in shooting up to the daily time frame, by the way, folks. I'm not going to look at the macro on this coin because every coin right now is macro bearish. Be careful foaming into these short-term pumps, right? Most of them fizzle out until the trend changes. We got to assume that every single breakout is going to be a trap. That's kind of the concept there.